Welcome to this DevRelate webinar, a gentle introduction to developer personas and segmentation. And with me on this webinar is Michael Rasalan, our Director of Research.
Glad to be here.
And so Michael runs the whole research side of the work that we do here at Evans Data. And so Michael, maybe just a quick about you and what your team does here at Evans Data.
Yeah, certainly. So I direct a team of analysts and statisticians to go through a lot of the survey research that we conduct here in Evans Data. It's not just survey research that we do other kinds of research. A lot of what we do is focused on understanding who the developer is and seeing how they work, what they do, what they choose to do. We run a lot of segmentation research on this information, and a lot of it goes into persona generation, as we will talk about later in this webinar.
And if you want to know a little more about the research process we do, we did a webinar together, I think it was December 2016. So if you go to DevRelate, go to the blog page, you'll find information about that webinar that we did. This one, again, we're focused on developer personas and segmentation. And down at the bottom of the screen, there's a link to the DevRelate system where I'll put up additional information about this webinar. I've got a few things up there now. As the 5 webinar sessions go on this week, we'll put more information and links to additional information on that page. We're going to quick introduction, talk about creating personas, identifying elements, a simple example, and then next steps that you might think about. As always, you can queue up questions in the GoToWebinar control panel. Type in your questions and we'll take those at the end. And it's great to have you all with us. Okay, first, I just want to mention what this webinar is all about beyond just, okay, developer personas and segmentation. It's really titled appropriately. It's a gentle introduction. The world of developer persona and segmentation creation is a lot more than a 30-minute webinar. So we're just going to give a quick overview and also to help you start thinking about the world of personas and segmentations. And beyond this webinar, there's lots more that can be done. You can think about how some of this capability maps to your developer community, but also we can work with you to help you build a plan and a research project to really fine-tune persona and segmentation in your own product, service, device, company, platform, whatever it might be. And so, Michael, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll move into the world of personas.
Yeah, so among the many questions that we get here at Evans Data is how do we look at the kinds of developers who use our tools and products? And we like to say that it's actually a pretty complicated question. It's not so simple. It's not so cut and dry as saying this is what a developer looks like and this is how we shall reach them. Certainly there are many different common characteristics that developers exhibit, but it's really hard to target developers when developers are interested in a diverse array of technologies and tools and are building many different kinds of applications. So at the very core, we believe at Evans Data that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for reaching developers. And that's why segmentation and developer profiling is an important part of what we do. We help people understand that it's not so cut and dry. Developers are a very diverse group of people.
Michael, we've had these discussions with people about some of the benefits, right? What might help get companies more in tune with the types of developers? Because people could say, well, we've got a developer community. We know all about them. Everything is great, but then we find out that maybe not everything is that great, right?
In many ways, people assume that there is kind of an a priori developer that they cater to, that they don't know much more about. At our most recent developer relations boot camp held in the Bay Area in March, someone came up to me and said she had assumed that persona work is something that's done by companies that are already established, that have communities that have already been fully developed. but we actually find that there are other occasions where persona work can benefit companies, whether they are well-established or they are startups. If, for example, you have an idea and you think that your idea for your tool meets the needs of a certain type of developer or meets one use case and would like to prove that there are other possible use cases that you're not exactly meeting at the moment, then persona work is a good way to understand the different kinds of developers that might find your tool useful other than the ones you have designed your tool for in the first place.
We oftentimes talk about the worldwide population of developers, 22 million professional developers. And some people think, well, developers all over the world are exactly the same. And that a developer in the United States versus a developer in India or China or France would all fit a certain pattern, right? But there are different aspects that affect the world of development, right?
Yeah, there are many different cultural differences that can affect how people consume information, how people learn to use technologies, or which technologies are actually being used in different countries. One particular platform may be popular in one region, but may not be so in other regions. And persona work allows you to discover these differences between developers across countries.
Okay, so let's get more into the world of personas and segmentation. Michael, take it away.
Yeah, certainly. When we do personas at Evans Data, we often approach it in terms of two kinds of persona research. Sometimes clients come to us thinking that they already know the kinds of developers who use these tools or their tools. And this is within our research. This is what we call a predetermined persona. For example, if company A says that they know that their tools are being used by enterprise types, by startups, and by hobbyists, and that there are certain characteristics that define these three groups, we can actually create studies that concentrate on validating the existence of these three personas. But in many ways, these are defined by broad assumptions that are already made by our client companies. When this is done, we may privilege particular stereotypes or particular presuppositions that companies have about who they're targeting, and a lot of these are driven by marketing hypotheses. Another way that we do personas is something called natural personas, and this is when we allow our own survey research to define who comprises a group of developers. We sometimes use this natural persona approach to create organically the kinds of personas that might exist within a defined group of people. And we use statistically significant metrics to characterize who these people are. And in this way, we feel that it's more of a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach to defining what like developers exist within a population.
There's different ways, right, to do persona research, interviews and other things, but why don't you talk about some of the ways that we do the work?
I mean, there is qualitative research that goes into what comprises a persona. Sometimes people approach it in terms of interviewing a wide variety of people within their developer community, and they try to fit these stories told by their developers into types. We also use a survey-based approach, a quantitative approach to create personas, because we feel that in surveying a larger sample of people, say at least 400 people, we're able to cover more developer types within a group. And we're also able to capture more information that can help define the kinds of personas there are within a target market. So a survey approach allows us to use data scientific methods to find patterns within a group of people. Also, when we do surveys, we don't only look at asking questions about demographics and about firmographics, like where people work and what kinds of organizations they work in. We also allow surveys to capture information about other more contextual data so we can actually see where people go to find their information or what kind of learning methods they like to use when picking up new technologies, so that once we do have a persona defined, we can map that information onto actionable data. Like if we know that a certain persona likes to read analyst reports, then that kind of outreach information can be made useful when that's paired with the persona definition. When defining personas, we ask about different key segmentation areas to allow us to paint a more detailed picture of who belongs within a particular sample or who these people are. And among the kinds of information we collect are elements like what industries they participate in, whether they have influence within their organizations. We always say that developers have a lot of influence within organizations in terms of what technologies to use. But do they actually pull the trigger when purchasing tools, when accessing technologies? We also look at types of applications they develop and what kinds of technology areas they occupy. It actually really depends on what kind of market a company seeks to target. And we choose elements that can be useful in defining the kind of people that would potentially use a technology vendor's tools. And what we do is once all these different areas or elements of study are collected, we do a cluster analysis to see which groups are more similar to each other within a larger population of developers. To give you an example of how we would approach this, if a company comes to us and asks us, we would like to find out what personas there are within our developer community. We often ask these people to come up with a hypothesis of who they think they reach and what defines the kinds of people they think they reach. So in this instance, right, if they form a hypothesis where they expect that there are distinct personas for their particular tool, and that they think that these tools are targeted towards hobbyists and specific types of professionals, we may suggest that the kinds of elements that we want to collect will center at identifiers that help weed out or help tease out who is a hobbyist and who is a professional. And some of these elements may include what we see on screen right now: developer age or developer experience, whether they make money, whether they have influence within their organization to purchase tools, and what they actually do within their organization. Or maybe they do their development work outside of their professional life. So these are the kinds of information that we like to collect when someone comes to us with this sort of hypothesis.
So Michael, how about going through a simple example?
As an example, we'll take you through a very simple persona exercise. Again, we start with a hypothesis that we develop with our clients. The first thing we have to do is we have to define the boundaries of our research. We can't say all developers are our target market. Maybe all developers are your target market, but that's a very large cookie to bite to target the entire developer population. But maybe if your tool or if your community is a very particular community with distinct characteristics, maybe there are distinct personas in the market for your particular tool. If this is so, certain kinds of questions can be created to help direct you in defining who these distinct personas are. On the other hand, if someone comes to us and says, we actually don't know anything about our target market and we'd like you to build something for us, then a whole other set of questions can be created to help define that. This sort of boundary making at the very beginning of your project can help direct the kinds of approach we can take to discover your personas. Once we know what boundaries there are to the kind of research we're making, we can then define which elements we choose to include in a persona generation. The kinds of elements that we select help determine what kind of questions we can ask, whether in interviews or in survey generation. If we feel that we're trying to understand a pretty undefined developer group, then we have to ask all sorts of demographic questions. We have to know everything about who you're trying to target. And it's not just how old they are and how experienced they are. We would need to know what they do, what they find important with their development tools, and what drives their work. And once we have determined what kinds of questions we're using in a survey, we do build a survey and send it out to a sample of developers that might potentially meet your criteria. So if you know that your tool is going to be marketed towards like a mobile developer segment, and if it's a mobile development tool, and you know that it works on particular platforms, we can do a survey that only includes people who are mobile developers and are targeting that particular platform. And once that survey is fielded and we ask all these demographic and firmographic questions, we get the results and we do a cluster analysis on the results to see if there are any groups of developers that are most like each other within that research. So what we see here right now is an example of a cluster analysis done on North American developers. And I believe these are mobile North American developers. And we found that for this particular sample set, that 4 groups of developers were discovered that are most distinct from each other, but within these groups are very similar developers. For example, as we can see, in cluster 1, if you look at the company size chart on the left, we see that cluster 1, most members of that particular cluster are in companies of 100 to 1,000 employees, whereas those people in clusters 3 and 4 are in larger companies with over 1,000 employees. And I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds in reading these charts, but we do see characteristics that can help define one group as distinct from another using a hierarchical cluster analysis. Once that sort of cluster analysis is done, our analysts actually look at the data and aggregate the findings to summarize what belongs in each cluster. And in this case, using the same data that we had in the previous page, we find that out of the 4 clusters, we see that the people, for example, in the second and first clusters are the youngest of all developers, and they target more mobile and cloud deployments for their work, or they use more cloud and mobile technologies. Whereas people in clusters 3 and 4 are people who are more experienced and may target more established technologies. And once this is done, we would summarize the cluster definition using more than just these characteristics. But once patterns are made, we can start to think about what the collection of these characteristics may represent. And that's when the fun starts and we can actually start naming who these clusters are. Looking at what characterizes each of these persona clusters, we can see that perhaps one group of people may be representative of startups, while another group of people may be representative of legacy interests. Now that we have defined who these clusters are, we can start taking this information and making it actionable. As I said earlier on in this discussion, in survey research, we not only have the opportunity to find out who the developers are, but we can also use that survey as a vehicle for learning other things about what these developers do or how they consume information. So if your goal is outreach, we can add a slew of outreach questions that can help to color the results of a cluster analysis. So after the persona work is done, you can do things like use the segmentation information to help create your marketing strategy. If we collect outreach information in the same survey, we can then say clusters 1 and 2 respond to this type of marketing, while clusters 3 and 4 may respond to another type of marketing. And there's more you can do. I mean, you can also do importance or satisfaction research at the same time as cluster analysis to see whether certain types of things are more important to certain types of developers than others. And in the end, it all comes back down to the fact that there really is no one way to do segmentation. There's not one type of developer. If you do persona research, you might find that there are different developers within your target community who might be reached out to or might be appeased in particular ways. I mean, I guess in this discussion, we really talked about how certain companies who might come to us with a particular approach might have a predefined idea of who their developers are, but might stand to learn about what they don't understand right now within their groups. And there are different strategies that we can take to validate those assumptions, but also to discover new ways of looking at a target community.
So thank you, Michael. A couple things to point you in the right directions for additional advice and work. If you need more help about where to start or what might be a next step, or you have a new product or technology, or you want to move into a new region with your SDKs, your tools, contact us and we can get on the phone with Michael and us and talk about what we might do together and then see where that goes. The other area that we also do that I'm involved in is training and workshops for developer relations teams and stakeholders who want to improve or, for many cases, create a community and an outreach program. There are some companies that have a new product and they have some ideas, but they want to see how they can reach out to other forms of developers. So again, if you're not sure where to start in this way, give us a call, send us an email, and we can get together on the phone or on a voice over IP system and explore what we might do together to help you be more successful in your developer relations and outreach and developer marketing. We just finished, as Michael mentioned, our 14th annual Developer Relations Conference in March. That happens each spring, usually near the end of March. We also have in the fall, in September, we have a Developer Marketing Summit, which is focused specifically on the unique aspects of developer marketing and marketing outreach. Both the Developer Relations Conference and the Developer Marketing Summit have keynote presenters and session presenters who are developer marketing and developer relations practitioners. So save the date. Our Developer Marketing Summit 2018 is coming up September 17th and 18th, somewhere in the Silicon Valley. We're finalizing the exact hotel conference location. So stay tuned. You'll get emails and you'll see notices on DevRelate as well. And so with that, I'll put my email address. You can always send me email, david@evansdata.com. And now it's time for your questions. So will the slides be available? And as always, yes, we'll provide the slides as well as a replay link. We'll send that out sometime next week to all the attendees, giving you pointers to where the slide download and the replay is if you missed any part or you want others in your organization to look at these things. So you get an email from us. It'll point to a page on DevRelate where you can get all these resources. Another question. So Michael, for a persona research project, what is the time frame? How long does a project usually take? I know that there's no one persona for all developers. Not all projects for persona and segmentation work are the same, but can you give everyone an idea of what the process might take?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on some companies and how different developer relations teams or developer marketing teams work. But in general, after we have come to a place where both our clients and Evans Data agrees on questionnaire to ask to developers. And it might actually take some time to build that questionnaire up, but if our clients are fast, then we work fast as well. But once a questionnaire is finalized, it usually takes around 4 to 6 weeks to finish a persona generation or persona creation study. And this includes time for fielding the survey, analyzing the results, and presenting it to the clients.
And so the output is a presentation, right?
The output is presentation, but we also, we give special actionable recommendations in the end within this presentation and also in the report that points our clients to what we think are the best ways to target these different personas based on the kind of research we come out with.
And one of the things that I love about being here at Evans Data, of course, I spent years running a very large global developer community, is that we work with a developer panel of platform and language agnostic developers, or developers from a broad spectrum across the planet of developers working in different companies, different countries, different places, right? And so we can help map and listen to what developers tell Evans Data. We're not just sitting here as like industry analysts saying, hey, we looked at your products and here's what we think your marketing should do or your company should do, right? This is us working with real working professional developers, right, Michael?
That's correct. I think that I think that we're very proud of the relationship we have with the developers who respond to our surveys, and the developers that we include in our research. And I think one of the reasons why why it's actually great to work here at Evans Data is the fact that that we're always keeping tab. We always have we always have a view of what developers are doing at the moment and what they're interested in currently, and it's always great to keep up with that.
Kelly was asking, can you give an example of how developers are different in different regions or want different things? There's several different, depending on region or country, that are differences that we've seen. Certain countries, the developers are younger. Their number of years of experience is shorter, especially as technology has moved into certain countries in more recent time versus from years ago. Technology adoption rates are often different in different countries. Maybe some are waiting for developers in North America to try things out. Age of companies, there's a lot of emerging countries with emerging business bases, for example. Salary levels might be different. Usual kind of things, of course, localized documentation, localized examples, developers liked those things. At the same time, programming languages, the keywords are English, and a lot of the work that developers will do in programming is English-based, even if the user interfaces are localized, for example. One thing in one of our global studies I remember was in the world of Internet of Things. APAC developers are more focused on consumer aspects of Internet of Things programming, whereas in North America, for example, it's more likely commercial and enterprise. But again, those are just some very high-level differences. Depending on the research and persona and segmentation, if some of that wants to be localized to a certain country level, you would see differences as well. And we would make sure to bring those out and highlight those versus what we see in a global persona and segmentation study? So that's a great question as well. And Jenny has a question here. Any recommendations on max numbers of personas that make sense? She says she's seen cases where up to 20 are identified. Wow. And that makes it quite complex to use the data.
Two ways. We can look at it from the statistics side. We know that there are limitations to the number of people that you can talk to from which you can identify a number of possible personas. And it might be that you might have a small enough sample where you can only find a very limited number of personas. But let's say you do have a very large sample of developers that you can examine. Even then, as you increase the number of personas that you can investigate, you might find that as the number increases, the actual usability of those individual personas might actually decrease. And the reasons for this is that there tends to be tightness of fit within a smaller number of personas. As the number of personas increase, you might find the number of distinguishing factors that create these personas decrease, such that there really isn't as much tightness within those particular clusters. So in our research, we tend to see that in most persona exercises, we find about 4 to 6 number of personas most usable. We have done research where we've had more, but in terms of persona membership, they're all highly concentrated within around 4 to 6 personas. Now, the other way of looking at this is through just the practicality standpoint. What is the practical number of personas that you can deal with? You know, in a perfect world, it'd be great if all organizations can target every single type of developer within this typology. But in most cases, there are limited resources that are available to talk to these developers or to find them and take care of them. So again, in terms of actionability, it might be more useful to address a smaller number of personas. So again, around 4 to 6 personas might be the best number of personas to target as a developer relations organization, because again, your resources are limited, and you might want to address the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. And one way to validate this is actually to do surveys to see how many of these 20 personas might actually be significant enough to target. And we can validate that for you and to see if there's enough membership in some of the, personas number 7 through 20.
And as you mentioned, Michael, if I can, if you're interviewing developers, like a physical interview, whether it's online or in person, that's one aspect, right? Versus doing a web-based browser survey system where you can reach out to more. Is there a better way to create or derive personas? Is there a number associated with each of those that gives you comfort in being able to establish the personas?
I think my answer would be that we like a data-centric approach here at Evans Data. So I think that for us, having the number of inputs associated with an online survey would allow us to compute a very well-rounded summary of the typology of developers. I think during interviews, you can conduct many interviews, but it will take time. And you will deal with a lot of qualitative data that is very useful and very descriptive, but might not be as encompassing, I suppose, in terms of giving you the number of data points possible to create a good set of personas.
And then there's one more that I'll take. How do you get, or why do developers take part in these research, in these persona research and other research projects that we do here at Evans Data? And we've actually surveyed developers to ask them what are the main reasons why they participate in the research. And they tell us in a majority that they want to provide feedback to companies to get features and or capabilities that they need for doing their job. So they like to give back, and they also like to get input into what your company is doing, what your product, service, device, capabilities could be that will help them be better developers and do their jobs. So that's a great question about the motivation developers have to spend time with us here at Evans Data. They want to give back, and they want to give feedback to our clients, to companies in the industry. Michael, any last words of wisdom for our developer relations professionals as it relates to developer personas and segmentation?
I think, at the very least, right, segmentation is a very important part of what you have to do as developer relations professionals. You need to know who the people are within your developer communities, and you cannot just take your developer communities as a singular sort of a single undistinguishable blob. And I think it's really very useful in terms of directing your outreach and directing your planning to understand that there are very many different types of developers, even if you think that your scope is a very narrow focus. And segmentation and persona analysis would do a lot to help with that goal.
Thank you, Michael, for spending this time with everyone, and also everyone out there. Thank you for joining us for this April DevRelate webinar. And we'll get the replay up and the slides up for you. You'll get an email with the link to a page that has all of that information. We'll see you each month for another DevRelate webinar. If you have ideas for topics, or if you have additional questions or feedback, just send me an email, david.i@evansdata.com, and I'll make sure it gets to all the team members here at Evans Data as well. Thank you again, everyone.